Okay. You're Francis with an I.
Thank you.
And just want to let the audience know that we're going to start in about 1 minute as everyone kind of logs on. All right, let's go ahead and get started then. All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Arizona Capital Times Morning Scoop. I'm Gary Grotto. I'm the executive editor of the Arizona Capital Times, and I'm your host for the next hour, where we're going to talk about Education Forward's Everything to Gain campaign. And our panelists today are going to talk about a public opinion poll that shows overwhelming support for education and training beyond high school and what they want the state's elected officials and business and education leaders to do to provide more education and training for Arizona students and adults. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Education Forward Arizona. It's a nonprofit that advocates for and acts on education improvements that advance the quality of life for all Arizonans. Thank you, Education Forward Arizona. And now I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Rich Nichols. He's the president and CEO of Education Forward Arizona. Good morning, Rich.
So good morning, everybody. First, I want to thank Gary and your team at the Capital Times for your attention to what we think is really one of the most important issues, significant issues for sure, that's facing our state today. I want to thank our esteemed panelists who've been committed partners on this issue. Thank you for your time here today. You know, across the state and across the country, there's a growing conversation about what the value of college is. Is it worth it? Who should go to college? Who really benefits from a college education? And there's a lot of chatter, you know, suggesting that maybe education and training after high school isn't worth it, or that the public doesn't see the value of it for everybody. And what we continue to see that's also frustrating is a lot of those who are questioning that value are those who have gone to college, or those whose kids are in post-secondary education, but for some reason they think it may just not be right for the other kids. And you know, everybody can raise their virtual hands if they know who the other kids are. So we're here to respond to that today with strong evidence that Arizona voters do see the value in training after high school and want to see the state's policy, education, and business leaders do more, you know, to provide those opportunities for post-secondary education and training. My organization, Education Forward Arizona, was created as a statewide voice for education improvements that advance the quality of life for all Arizonans. Our Everything to Gain campaign has been beating the drum all across the state for over a year since we launched it, to talk about the importance of increasing the number of Arizona adults with degrees and workforce certifications. But as our panelists will tell you, this is really not just an education issue. You know, increasing opportunities for education and training after high school provides amazing benefits to individuals, their families, and communities, and to the economic strength of the state. You know, the issue really affects every single one of us. Let me show you something just quickly here as we start. So we have, you know, an attainment goal here that we will have 60% of Arizonans aged 25 to 64 that complete their education beyond high school by 2030. That includes a degree, apprenticeship, or other industry-specific workforce certification. So whatever path those students are on, whoever moves to our state with these degrees and certificates, they're counted. That goal is named Achieve 60 AZ, and it's directly related to projections that over 60% of Arizona's job openings require, you know, something after high school. But we also know that our attainment rate and the pipeline of post-high school enrollment has really remained flat. And, having only 48% of our students who are going on to any type of post-secondary education within 12 months of graduating from their high school is simply not sustainable. And the news is that our voters understand this, and they have made a really strong demand through this poll that we do more as a state, as I mentioned. And the last thing I'll show you before we turn it over is there's a lot of great news here, because if we can add these 500,000 degrees over the next 7 years or so to get us to that goal, and if we can put more people into post-secondary after high school, our state can benefit to the tune of $5 billion every year that happens. And if you all are watching what's going on with our budget right now, you know that our state could use $5 billion a year to spend on things that are important to citizens. So we're happy to have everybody here today. And, I'm going to turn it back over to Gary to introduce our next panelist and get us started. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Rich. And our next panelist is Dr. Sybil Francis. Dr. Francis is the co-founder of the nonprofit Nonpartisan Center for the Future of Arizona, and she serves as its chair, its president, and CEO. And it's good to see you again, Dr. Francis, and good morning.
Good morning, and it's so great to be with all of you this morning. Thanks for the great service of the Morning Scoop, which I always enjoy, and Gary. And it's an honor to be here to really support the findings of Education Forward Arizona, which has been a great partner to Center for the Future of Arizona. We're a nonprofit organization committed to bringing Arizonans together to create a stronger and brighter future for our state. And one of the things that we know through our own deep public opinion survey research over the last 15 years is that Arizonans do understand the importance of education and education beyond high school. We've conducted surveys over the last 15 years on all the big major issues that are important to the future of our state, and we've found very high levels of agreement across many issues: education, jobs, the environment, and others. But consistently, education comes out very high among the very high findings that we find across the board. So what we found is that Arizonans agree on much more than we disagree on the most important issues to the future for our state, and they want action on these issues. Arizonans understand the importance of education, not only to the individual, but also to our state. As Rich pointed out, the potential financial benefits to the state of having a more highly educated population. I just did want to comment quickly on what Rich was saying about the questioning of whether or not college is important. What I find really interesting is what we hear often through the media from politicians is, about polarization and division in our state and in our country. But in fact, when you listen to what Arizonans say, and that's what we do, we center the voices of Arizonans, we know that there isn't that kind of division. And in fact, there's much more agreement. So the big question is, why do we have a gap between what Arizonans say they want and the action that we're getting?
All right, thank you, Dr. Francis. And our other panelist is Monica Villalobos. She's the president of the Arizona Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Good morning, Monica.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having us on, Gary, and a big good morning to all of our audience and my esteemed colleagues. I always know I'm in the right room when I'm with these folks, so welcome to the right room. At the Arizona Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, for 75 years, we have provided resources, education, workshops, training for business owners, new and old business owners, wherever you are in your business. And one of the biggest issues that we face today is workforce. And we need to get away from thinking that education is just an education issue. It's so much more than that. It really lies at that intersection between education, business, and public policy. Businesses are the end consumer of the education product. And what we really need to understand in the business community is that unlike business, education is not about widgets or services and, getting the same, getting an input and trying to put out the exact same output. Students are far more diverse. Their needs are definitely more diverse, and we can't treat them like widgets, right? We have to be able to also meet students where they are so that they can be part of our workforce and our succession plan in the business community. I think the poll really shows that the public sees why it's so important to Arizona's workforce, that education is so important to Arizona's workforce, and why education and training after high school is also a part of our succession plan and our sustainability. So we need to pay a lot more, we need to pay closer attention. We need to make it part of our economic strategy for a stronger economy. We know that better education means better jobs, and that means more tax revenue from higher paying jobs, and that'll improve the quality of life of everyone in the state.
All right, thank you very much. And welcome to Morning Scoop. And rounding out our panelists is Paul Bentz. Paul is the Senior Vice President of Research and Strategy with High Ground Public Affairs. Good morning, Paul, and thank you for joining us. And you're going to give us a short presentation on some polling that you and another pollster did on post-secondary education. And, looking at it, I mean, and Dr. Francis brought this up a little bit, we're in an age of divided government in Arizona, where, it's not just the political parties that are in conflict with each other, but the parties themselves and, in intra-party or, within themselves. They have disagreements within their ranks. So some of your findings are pretty startling as far as agreement. Is that right, Paul?
Well, absolutely. Good morning, everyone. My name is Paul Bentz. I am the Senior Vice President of Research and Strategy at High Ground Public Affairs, and I'm here representing a survey team today, a bipartisan group of High Ground and FM3 Public Opinion. We worked on this survey data together to create a bipartisan approach to the survey. And I think we gave away a little bit of the results in the title of the panel itself, which was "Voters Agree that Education Beyond High School was Critical for the State's Success." And what we find in a growing hyper-partisan environment where it's almost like two cells dividing from one another based on how the political leaders act, what we actually find is there's a significant amount of common ground among not only the electorate, but the people of Arizona. And that's something that Education Forward has spent a lot of time talking about. That's something that Center for the Future of Arizona spent a lot of time talking about. And that's what this data reflects. And so, as we mentioned, this was a bipartisan survey approach. We did a statewide survey that was balanced across age, party, gender, and region, used both cell phones, text invitations, telephone interviews, online interviews, was dual mode and dual language, and was worked on by a more progressive leaning firm, FM3, and a more conservative leaning firm, High Ground, to ensure that we had a bipartisan review of the questions itself, as well as this data. So when you look at this, this is not from one particular partisan approach or another. We really tried to take a approach from both sides of the aisle and reflect also the views and the interests of those independent leaning voters as well. So this is relevant data from a broader survey. We're not going to walk you through every single question, but I think one of the things that Gary pointed out that's really essential to note is that even in surveys, what we typically find, if you can find something that 55%, 60% of the electorate agree upon, that's generally a really good start, because we really do see a divided electorate. And so what we see is that there is strong agreement that policy leaders, education leaders, business leaders, and others should do more to support education and training beyond high school. And they understand some essential benefits here, that every student should have access to quality education, that secondary education, post-secondary education gives you skills to succeed in a career, and that we should be providing training and retraining and career paths for students leaving high school as well as adults. And I just want to point out that this is 96% agreement, 92% agreement, and 93% agreement. We can't get 93% of folks in a general survey among the electorate to agree what color the sky is. And so really, when we see this really significant amount of support, especially this 85% support that strongly agree that everyone should have access, 70% that post-secondary educations give them skills to succeed in a career or obtain industry certification. These are big numbers that really make us stand up as pollsters and pay attention. So, and then we see that also down the list, there's still even more so that even had that 80% support. As I mentioned, anything above 60% should be incredibly well regarded. We have 3 more stats here. Education beyond high school is necessary for a person to be successful in today's work world. That recognition that education beyond high school impacts the quality of life, and this notion that education beyond high school makes people better off financially. These are shared values as an electorate. People understand them. This is not something that just our friends here are saying or that the folks in this room are saying. This is something that the group as a whole and that a state and the voters critically understand, which leads to what they also understand, which are the benefits, the why. There is strong agreement among the electorate about why this is important, okay? We see that the improving quality of life, making better citizens for our community, making competitive and helping those competitive industries and filling these critical severe workforce shortages. Again, 97, 96, 95% agreement, with more than 3/4 of the electorate understanding and really seeing the benefit of what's being talked about here. And that's why it shouldn't be as a surprise, but I think a lot of folks will be surprised to discover that 86% of the electorate support the 60% attainment vision that Rich talked about at the beginning, setting the stage for this, with 56% strong support. This across all partisan groups, all age groups. This is not motivated by one group or another. We really see large majorities of the electorate on both sides of the aisle, all age groups, younger voters, older voters, regional, across, Maricopa, Pima, rural. We see strong amounts of support for reaching this 60% achievement, which really leads to the ultimate, what we're talking about here today is more should be done. 71% of the electorate believes that more should be done. This is a mandate to do more. This is a desire among the electorate. This isn't just this would be a good thing to do, or it sounds good. This is a strong desire among the electorate to do more. And I think it's important to note that I'm going to go through a little bit of partisan and age demographics on this. You'll see that we see large majorities across men, women, Democrats, independents, even Republicans, liberal, moderate, even a large majority of conservatives, and all age demographics, younger voters as well as older voters. And sometimes our older voters are an audience that don't necessarily support things. They're not going back to college, or they don't necessarily need post-secondary education or retraining. They're likely retired. But what we find is that there's strong support across the board. We are honored to do work for the Center of Future of Arizona as well on their Arizona Voters Agenda. And if this were proposed as part of the Arizona Voters Agenda, it would achieve the levels of support that we'd like to see to be a part of the overall agenda, which means that not only is there strong support for an item, but there's across the board support. These are things that elected officials should stand up and pay attention to, because no matter what group, no matter how you parse it, no matter how you sort of draw the Venn diagram of intersections, everybody really is in strong support. And as I mentioned, this really comes down to there's a high value for this type of education and training after high school. And folks across the aisle, no matter what, would like to see more. And so what we ultimately see is sort of those motivations. What are those key motivations for doing more? And we'll talk a lot about these. I'm not going to read these to you, but the notion of being able to connect people to their careers, this notion that, like apprenticeships of the past, that this type of training is necessary, that we've been successful as a state in attracting groups like Intel and TSM because we've been able to provide a trained workforce, because this gives people a better opportunity to improve their lifetime income. These are ones that have 90, 92, 84, 82% overall support. People above 80% of folks get that this attainment goal leads to real, tangible, obtainable results. And that's why that 71% would like to do more. And then finally, they recognize that it's important that job training skills beyond high school make Arizona have the skills to get good paying jobs, fill our skills gap, and ultimately, as Rich mentioned, benefit our economy. I think one of the biggest takeaways here is that we are seeing a strong amount of support among the electorate for doing more. And we have seen the success of this, particularly in the last decade or so. Used to be, when I did this type of polling, everything was about jobs. Jobs, creating more jobs, attracting future workforce. That was almost everything that we did was about jobs. We're having such great success in attracting employers and jobs that it is translated now to that the electorate understands we need the people for the companies to hire. So we've actually matured the conversation quite a bit from the great work of many of the individuals on this panel in making sure that folks understood that this was essential. And so that's the brief version of this, what the polling is telling you. And so with that, I'm happy to turn it back over to you, Gary.
Great, thank you very much. Let me just get back to my notes. So, Rich, let's talk a little bit first about, the statewide attainment goals. Achieved 60 AZ, and 60%, 25 to 65-year-old will complete education beyond high school. In 2020, we were at 46%. Today, we're at 48. We got 6 more years to go. Are we where we ought to be at this point, or are we stuck? Where are we in the process?
Yeah, it's a great question, Gary. And let me give a little bit of context here so we can, get a look at the full picture. So when this goal was created, Arizona was at 42%. And knowing we needed to get to 60% was really driven by us being able to look into the future. And what Paul said was true. We were all talking about jobs that we needed, 6 or 7 years ago. Those jobs are now here. We have to fill them. What we did know back then was that almost 70% of jobs are going to take some type of post-secondary education, so education beyond high school. So the goal was set at 60%. It was a really heavy lift. Everybody understood that. And so over the last several years, we've gained 6 percentage points. To give some reference, each of those percentage points is worth thousands and thousands of net new degree, certificate, credentials we have, and they drive, for every percentage point, hundreds of millions of dollars in economic gains for our state. So sure, we'd like to be further ahead, 50, 51, 52%, but pursuing the goal, almost regardless of where we end up in the long run, is throwing off these massive economic and social benefits for our state for every single percentage point we gain. So we think we can still get there, and it's a holistic picture. Attainment is not just about us getting more people from high school into college and graduating. The goal says it's 25 to 64-year-olds that live in our state. So, when people move to our state, so we have to have a good, business plan to get people into our state. When we have adults that maybe don't have or have some college and no degree, we have to get them back in school. We certainly have to strengthen our pipeline from high school to college, but it takes all of that to reach the goal. But, when we're kicking off hundreds of millions of dollars of economic impact for every percentage point we gain, pursuing that goal and pursuing it robustly really is the key to us continuing to make those gains. It's not hyperbole to say, Gary, that, us continue to increase education and educational attainment in our state, is really the key to the future of our state. If we don't do that, we can go nowhere but backwards. And so that's why this goal is so important and why our pursuit of that goal is so important.
And now, Sybil, or I'm sorry, Dr. Francis, you
Sybil is
mentioned.
fine.
Okay, great. The Center for the Future of Arizona has done, its own polling over the years. I think Paul had mentioned it, you mentioned it, and you just keep finding these, on these key issues that there tends to be a lot of agreement.
Sure. So I do want to just focus on that because I think we do live in a time when we hear so much about polarization and division. And I'm sure many of you in the audience are thinking, well, if we have all this agreement, what gives? Like, why are we not doing better? And so I think it is a cause for hope and encouragement to know that this is what Arizonans feel about education, because I think we do hear the drumbeat around, sort of all the hot button issues in education, but we're not hearing enough about the things that Arizonans really truly want. And so I think, I think the first thing that we want to think about is that is a reality. So let's rise above the noise and think about that. And I think that also leads to this idea that we should really let the data lead us in all that we do. So not only do we know that Arizonans care about education, but we also have something called the Education Progress Meter that gives us some information about how we're actually doing in Arizona. And frankly, there is work to do, as we all know. But I think the other important piece of data that we have found in our survey research is that at least 2/3, if not more, of Arizonans prefer that elected leaders come together to solve problems and focus on the things that are important rather than stick to ideology. We hear too much about hot button issues and not about solutions. So I think that's also a big takeaway that we need to focus on. And so we know what Arizonans want, and we should really be focusing on how we get there and demanding that from our leaders. And if they don't provide that leadership, which we desperately need, then asking the question, why is it that we have leaders who are so disconnected from what Arizonans want?
So, Monica, as the leader of the Arizona Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, you probably have the ear of many legislators and leaders. What do you got to do to get them off get their focus off the hot button issues and onto the things that everybody agrees about?
That's the $64 million question, right? I think a lot of it is providing the information and being able to give them the data to not only build the policy, but also be able to, speak intelligently and advocate on behalf of education. I think also helping them understand the push-pull dynamic between education and business, right? So business creates the demand, and business is saying, we need a more skilled workforce, period. Otherwise, we're going to continue to lose out contracts. We're going to continue to lose companies from coming to Arizona because we don't have the talent pipeline. That's a business argument to education, right? We need homegrown talent. And what this information is telling us is, and what it's telling legislators, more importantly, is that their constituents want this just for the sake of education. But there's an additional argument, right, in the business community of we have a labor and workforce shortage. And so being able to help, I think, legislators and others, including the press, piece together how all of this dynamic and ecosystem levers, what the levers are in each of these is really critical. And making sure that people understand we're not functioning in a silo. Employers are educators and educators are employers. I think that's the most important message that I took away from this poll.
All right.
Hey, Gary, let me, if you don't mind, let me talk about that for just a minute. I mean, we are seeing right now a lot of different activity in the business world to support education beyond high school. We're seeing multiple groups look at how we grow our apprenticeship models here in the state and really taking different approaches on that. Internships, even for high school students, are making a big comeback as companies, start to understand how to mitigate, some of the risk and vulnerability of having, young people working in their organization. So there's a lot going on. But as we even look at this poll, the public was super clear. I mean, polling at rates of over 90%, over 80% on several, what we would think about as policy recommendations, really just common sense best practices about what the state could do. I mean, they're crystal clear that they want action. And let me show just a couple of what those are to give people a good idea of kind of what the public is saying they think would work, because it makes great sense. And I want to make sure that, people understand that there's good ideas out there that we could take action around. Hang on one second. So like I mentioned, in this poll that Paul talked about, we asked voters how they actually wanted us to get there. And I've seen some things in the chat, people talking about this same type of thing. More than 80% of those that we talked to, agreed on 5 really, really important topics or policy type of recommendations, actions that legislators could take today if they wanted to. One of those, and it goes right to what we've all been talking about, is how we connect careers and education together, was to expand access to technical training and education programs during high school that will lead to that credential. So even when folks come out of high school, they may have an associate's degree. They may have a credential that would allow them to go to work. Doesn't mean they couldn't continue their post-secondary education, but there's things that we could do as a state to make this happen. Also, I think over 90% said that we should expand dual enrollment programs. And for those who don't know what that looks like, that means that we would have high school students enrolling in college level classes. And the benefits of that are immense. Number one, it cuts students' time to degree once they get out of high school. So it tackles the affordability issue. It also lets students know who maybe are first generation college goers that they can do the work. There's so much value in this, but today, we have limits on how much we can actually offer because of price and how many teachers we have that can actually teach these types of courses. But this is something that we could do through legislation. People were also crystal clear, and Gary, you know that, and the others here know it too, that Arizona's counselor to student ratio is last in the country, and not last by a little, it's last by a lot. So we have over 700 students for every 1 counselor in our state. And so people wonder why it's hard for students to think about how they apply for post-secondary, how they complete their federal paperwork. What should I be doing when I'm a sophomore or junior to make sure I'm on the right path for whatever my career is? Well, the simple question is, we don't have enough people providing that service to the students. And our folks out in the state think that every high school in Arizona should have a dedicated college or career advisor and counselor to help those students. We are not even close to that today. This is something that could happen through policy change. 2 more that people agreed on. One is that even before high school, we have to help students and families do a better job at identifying what their interests and strengths and aptitudes are. So we can't start talking about this, and the public knows, when, students are 17 or 18 years old. By then, a lot of them have self-selected out of the process or foreclosed on their chances. And then the last thing that I would, say about this, what the public thought, and, this shows that people are really right on, is that we increase the academic counseling and support for those who start at our community colleges and they want to transfer on. So although we have, great plans in place for that to happen, it still takes advice and counsel in many cases to help students make a move from our community colleges, which we have, we're blessed with terrific community college districts and systems in our state that are very affordable and are a great place to launch if you want to do a 4-year degree. But sometimes folks have trouble getting from that community college into the universities without some help. So, these are things that the public really got behind, and that, I think if we want action, this is a great place to start.
Could I
Well,
just,
I-
could I
Go
just
ahead.
jump, just add a couple of things, because I think that's really terrific. Through our own research, through Gallup, as well as the Arizona Voters Agenda that Paul mentioned, and I'm going to ask Heather Thornton to put links to those in the chat for you. We've also found strong agreement among Arizonans that we need more investment in education. So I think that's a really important thing to understand. Financial aid, we know that students are not completing the financial aid forms at the kind of rate that we need, and that can, I saw a lot of comments in the chat about the cost of higher education. There's also probably not enough understood or known about what types of financial packages our universities have available for students, and that's just something that needs to be more widely known. And of course, with the community college, the wonderful community college system we have, students can begin and go for 2 years at community college and then transfer to our state universities if they want a 4-year degree. So there are ways of cutting down the cost, but I did just want to say that that Arizonans want more investment in education, and we are one of the very few states in the country that don't have state financial aid. And while that's not on the political docket right now, I think it's something we all are aware of and think about as a potential help to all of this. And then finally, I think Rich said it in so many words, but I'll just say it slightly different. How do we create more seamless career pathways, starting with career exploration in middle school, moving on to, choosing the right courses in high school, taking some dual enrollment classes while in high school so you can actually get college credit, which also reduces your cost of college, and work your way into a post-secondary education that gives you a leg up in terms of your career, so you're not wasting time when you're in college and maybe spending more money than you need to while you're there. So those are just a few possible solutions.
Well, I know that from other morning scoops that I've done here, we do a morning scoop on apprenticeships. We do with, the CTEDs, and, that's one of the things they are doing that I know of, that, they're trying to get them in junior high. I guess the question is, how does a kid find out that, they're mechanically inclined, or, they've got a skill that maybe that you might not use in a college atmosphere. Rich, got any thoughts on that?
Sure. I think most, I don't think any of us think that a student or a learner has everything figured out when they're 12 years old or 11 years
Right.
old, right, in middle school. So I think what we have to do, and this is, we hear this, especially out in the state in rural Arizona, we have to offer the right interventions, the right opportunities for learning and inquisition and interest at the right times. And we have to be more consistent about that. So if you go to rural Arizona, what you'll hear when you ask people what are the barriers to them going on a post-secondary, it's like, mostly say we didn't have information about this when we needed to make decisions, mostly because of resources that are available. So I think what we need to think about is how we offer tools, surveys, interest assessments, and information in an equitable way, in a consistent way, at the right time. So we have to have a plan. And that's what we're hearing, Gary. Arizona doesn't have today a plan for education, a state plan for education. So we don't really have a guidebook of who should be getting when, what across the state. And, if you don't have a plan or a map, it's hard to tell where you're going and how you're going to invest to get there. So, and we also need to really, to get a little more granular, think about how we use this momentum to bring together these business leaders, these education leaders, policymakers, government, to think about how we actually create the plan for attainment and how we get there. You know, we and others have done a lot to help us kind of think about what best practices are, but we need a plan that can drive investment and policy making, and that we can get all the important parties together on. If you don't have business at the table in a big way, if you don't have government, if you don't have education all working together, then it's not going to happen. So that's really the call to action here. Is for let's agree that we need to work together to get that plan of action on how we reach that attainment goal, or else we're going to have this conversation again in 2030.
Absolutely. Rich, if I can just also add that other missing component is parents, right? The demand that they have for their children and advocating for their children to get more. And the second point I just wanted to make very quickly is that re-careering at 13 is a lot easier than re-careering at 30, right? And so the idea of having more options available earlier on in your academic career only sets you up for success, because careers are a process of elimination, right? What don't you want to do? If we could at least figure out what you don't want to do and drive you closer to what you do want to do and where your goals are, happy employees are productive employees. And so I think that gets lost in some of this as well, as we start to think about asking children to do apprenticeships or internships. We want to give them every possible opportunity so they can make their decisions when it's time to make those decisions.
And, to go back to, the attainment goal and, the number that we're at and so forth, why aren't we at 52%? Why are people choosing not to go on and get, that certificate or join an apprenticeship or things like that?
I'm happy to offer some insight on that from what we see. Our organization works with students, parents, schools all across the state through several different programs, and we also have a big scholarship program. So we get to talk to a lot of students all throughout their academic career. And I think one thing that we're seeing now that we really didn't see 15 years ago or 20 years ago when we were kind of making gains was that there are very powerful influencers in people's lives now that are influencing them in a different way than they were influenced 20 years ago when we were really thinking about decision making. So, we're not only kind of fighting this question, is it worth it from a data standpoint? We're also kind of, fighting this narrative that maybe you don't need it to be successful. Now, the data doesn't prove that out at all. Matter of fact, it's quite the reverse. I was here a year ago talking to you, Gary, with Paul Luna after we had done the Billions to Gain report that literally showed that the key to the state's future economically and socially was through more people going to some type of education after high school, people completing once they get there, and not letting geography or the zip code kind of get in the way of people's success. So, but what we're seeing now is, social media influencers, in sometimes, our politicians, maybe our spiritual leaders, maybe our community leaders, telling people actively that it's not worth it. They don't need it. They can make it without it. And, I think unfortunately some of that is politicized and part of political agendas, which, makes it divisive by nature. But the data just doesn't prove that out, Gary. So what we're focused on is really getting the right narrative out in the state to, help students understand what the upside of it is, and their parents, and, what the messages are that are compelling, today, not what the messages are that are compelling, a decade ago.
So, when I was a kid, it was, you got to go to college, you got to go to college. And there was almost a stigma to, being a construction worker or, a blue collar guy or whatever. But now there seems to be, and I think you may have touched on this a little bit from your last comment, but there's, this aversion or this narrative out there about you don't need a college education or you don't need to go to college. I mean, how do we get the word out there that, okay, maybe college is not for you, but there are other things out there that are, well-paying and helpful to the economy and so forth.
Yeah, I think that, and I'm glad to hear from our panelists. They all, they think about this every single day. But I think, what the best way to make that happen is by us all using our networks and all really thinking thoughtfully about those messages that work to get that word out there. The other thing I would say, Gary, is that, I think that we can't use the word college as a barrier term, right? College can't be a bad word. College really is this word that people use for post-secondary education. So I don't think there's any stigma around being a construction worker or a plumber or an electrician. I think it's highly valued, and I think those opportunities are out there. I think what we need to think about is how we all get on the same page about talking to students about what they can do after high school, what degree or certificate that they earn that's going to, help them and their families. Number one, the state kind of comes second, right? But their communities and their family are the ones who are going to benefit immediately. Sybil and Monica and Paul, I know you guys have thoughts on this too. And it's a really interesting question about how we distribute the right messages.
So the one thing I would say, the message that I get from all of this data and from this discussion, the thing I've said to politicians and elected officials is you can win talking about this issue. You can be successful at the ballot box. You can be successful in getting people to support you in addressing these key needs. Too much of our politics is driven by the highly partisan, highly voluminous, very aggressive issues that only appeal to narrow segments of our electorate. This is one that appeals to such a broad segment of our electorate that it's almost unfathomable for folks, especially elected officials, to see. But what we're saying here is you can win talking about this item. And so I see in the chat a lot of discussion about costs. I see chat about how the best to achieve this. What we're saying here is it's important to have this debate and that our policy leaders need to be part of it, because there's a great deal of success here, and we see the benefits, the $5 billion benefits, the mandate by the people. They win by doing this. So instead of picking a fight with the universities, instead of picking an adversarial relationship with education, instead of just taking a negative approach on all things education related, what we're seeing here is that there is great places that they can be a part of it and have success. And so that's a big takeaway. I know there's a lot of folks giving some ideas in the chat that are really, really helpful, but we know a lot of these. That what you need to do is be telling the policymakers, your elected officials and others, hey, I want you to do this. This is how we get things done. And in this upcoming this coming season, we're having an election this year. These are things you should be asking them about at debates. This is the things that they should be talking about in the panels. If they come to your business group, these are the things that you should be asking about, because these are what's important. So that's, I think, one of the biggest takeaways we get from this data.
And I'll just jump in and follow on Paul's incredibly great comment. And that's why we're so thrilled to be working with High Ground on what has been alluded to, but not necessarily spelled out, is this what we call the Arizona Voters Agenda, which we did for the first time. We Center for the Future of Arizona with High Ground in the 22 election. And what we set out to do was, how do we center the voices of likely Arizona voters in the political atmosphere that we are finding ourselves in now in this new election. And we surveyed Arizonans across broad issues: education, jobs, housing, and other issues. And we were really looking for, where do we have levels of agreement that, as Paul said, we can bring to leaders, candidates for office, and then to elected leaders, where we can say to them, yes, it's safe for you to take on these issues, because not only do we have 50% agreement across the likely voters, including 50% agreement among Democrats, Republicans, and independents. So anything that ranks higher than 50% across all groups makes it onto what we call the Arizona Voters Agenda. And again, I won't go through all the data, but the data that we found on education is very consistent with the Education Forward Arizona data. In fact, we partnered with them on this research in the 22 election, everything we found through our Gallup Arizona survey research. So as Paul said, the people of Arizona support this. It's our politics that are divided, but we need to let politicians know that there is this high level of support for this.
So Paul, when you tell the politician that they can win on this, I mean, what are you hearing back from them? What are they, they've got their own values and principles as well.
Well, I would point to business leaders like Monica and thought leaders like Rich and Sybil and say, these are the folks that you need to talk to, not the folks that are shouting you down at your precinct committee meeting. And I think that's where we find is our elected officials get into very small rooms of people and become of the belief that everybody feels the same way as that narrow portion of the electorate. Also, the fact that we have so many of our elected officials that are elected in majority districts where they don't really have to compete, especially on the legislative level. Only 5 out of our 30 legislative districts are considered competitive. So they just are focused on winning the primary instead of listening to the overall electorate. But business leaders and others are the folks that have really helped over the last 2 decades, especially, make the state as successful as it is. When we see things like Taiwan Semiconductor, Intel, the large amount of economic growth, our transportation investments, that's all been done by this coalition of folks, and they would be wise to listen to it instead of really dividing. So that's the big piece of advice I give them. Do they listen all the time? Well, no, but I've been very consistent in repetition about the data and what the data says, and that's what I hold on to when I talk to these folks.
So I'll just jump in. I have seen some things in the chat, like, are we sharing this with legislators? How do we get the word out? I would encourage everyone on this Zoom to take this information to whatever their community is and make sure that this message gets out, because it's not, as someone said, we're talking to the choir here. We need to get this information in the hands of people who are making decisions so that they can feel empowered by what Arizonans want and feel that it's okay to actually be responsive to what Arizonans want.
Yeah, one of the things we learned, Sybil, in working with you all a couple of years ago, was that while the rhetoric, dominates the signs you see in people's front yards and the signs along the roadway and the talking points that people who are running for office especially might use, when you talk to the voters, that's not really what they want to hear about. It's almost the exact opposite. Voters are starving for solutions and for people who will bring them solutions and want to work to solve issues. So when you ask voters what they want to hear about, they want to hear about, how are you going to help my student be a better reader in 3rd grade? How are we going to increase 8th grade math scores? What information should my student be getting when he or she's a sophomore in high school about their post-secondary options, or an 8th grader? They don't want to hear about some of these other kind of populist things. That they really are solution hungry, and there's this just continuing aspiration gap between what they want and what they're being given, even when they think they're voting for the right person. So we really have to be in front of these folks, challenging them to help us solve this attainment issue, not just talk about, that they think our education costs too much or we're not spending wisely, because really that's most of the time just a red herring. So they don't have to talk about how we actually solve an issue.
All right, we got about 6 minutes left, and I'm going to take one question from the audience, and then we'll wrap it up with final comments from each of you, if you don't mind. So this is a question about the difficult to pursue a very costly post-secondary education where people are having difficulties paying bills and buying food. What's the proposal to help people obtain this education without going bankrupt? Rich?
Sure. Well, just to give a little context on affordability in our state. So like I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of great options for education after high school in our state, including a robust community college system, a terrific public university system, plenty of private options, both large and small, that really teach folks who want maybe either more narrow offerings or broad offerings. And if we look across the country, our universities, for instance, are extremely competitive when it comes to their tuition tag. Used to be more competitive when they got money from the state to actually help send Arizonans to school. Our community colleges, for anybody who applies through the FAFSA and gets a Pell Grant, they have enough to cover their entire cost at our community colleges. So there are a lot of ways to do this. Even at the universities, if a family makes under $70,000 a year, they can get their tuition paid for at our 3 major public universities. So there are a lot of things that our universities, community college systems, our private schools are trying to do to help people. And what we have to do is really help our students gain access to those and understand those better. I mean, I think about the Arizona Promise program that, although it's certainly not funded where it needs to be, that's a good start, having $20 or $40 million available for low-income students to go to our universities. We need to expand that to community colleges. We need to invest in it more like other states around us are doing to see the same impact. So, that's how we send people on without, breaking the bank, is really by helping them find those resources, and especially for those who need the help the most.
Sybil, we got about 3 minutes left. Can you
Okay.
give us the
I'll
last
just-
word?
Oh, well, I just want to say, first of all, again, congratulations again to Education Forward Arizona for this wonderful research, and along with High Ground. And we're proud to be partners with both of you. I think this is really cause for optimism and hope. And I think we need to focus on that big picture, as well as focus on the kinds of practical things we can do to help people every day. But we really do need leadership, as Rich said, and I think we need a plan for how to achieve this. And so I think we need to take this message to decision makers and really help them understand that they do have the support of Arizonans, and that we're not, divided on this issue, and that we should move forward. Thank you.
Well, I can say that, this webinar is being recorded, and it's going to be posted on the Arizona Capitol Times website. Hopefully, some of the lawmakers will take a look at that as well. And I just want to say thank you to our panelists, Monica Villalobos, Paul Bentz, Dr. Sybil Francis, and Rich Nickel, and to Education Forward Arizona for sponsoring this. And if you could just keep your and thank the audience for attending as well. And I just want to say, keep an eye out in your inboxes, because we have some other morning scoops planned. And so if everybody just have a good day, and thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you. Good to see you, Monica.
Thanks, everybody.
Goodbye.